What's going on, everybody? This is the No BS Fitness Prescription Podcast. It is I, your host, Coach Dominic Frazier, with my beautiful co-host, Keani Adams. And today we have a special guest, a groundbreaking person in the fitness industry, the creator of the RP Diet app and Renaissance Periodization, Mr. Nick Shaw. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for having me on. How are you guys?
Doing good, doing good. So first and foremost, we want to say thank you for coming on. There are a lot of people like myself that do know about RP, your books, your app, certifications, things that you guys have like that, and then even the book that you have written. So first and foremost, for those that don't know who you are, just give us a little insight on who you are, where you're coming from, and how RP got started.
Yeah. Again, thanks for having me on. Great to be here. So way back in the day, I grew up born and raised in Michigan and went to school at the University of Michigan. It's tough to say that right now. There's some stuff going on in Michigan. Don't need to get into that, but it hurts me. I've been wearing Michigan clothes a little bit less this past week, out in public at least. I live down in Charlotte, North Carolina now, so when you do see people wearing Michigan, it's usually people stop and say something. So I'm like, you know what? Right now I'm good. I don't need people to say anything right now. But that's actually where I met Dr. Mike, was at the University of Michigan. And he convinced me to join the powerlifting club. And that kind of got me hooked. I was already into lifting, of course, but that got me hooked into more serious lifting. He started helping write some of my diet and training. I did a bodybuilding show in 2008. I was the first person that Mike ever coached into a show like that. It was a lot of fun and kind of changed the trajectory of my life, because I was like, oh, you know what? I was going to school for sport management. But once I got into serious lifting, I was like, you know what? I'd kind of like to do something fitness, exercise related the rest of my life. And so once I graduated from Michigan, I ended up going out to New York City to be a personal trainer. And that's where Mike was too. He was 2 years ahead of me in school, so he was finishing his master's program from Appalachian State. I finished my undergrad at Michigan. We both moved out there. He was out there for about a year before he went back to get his PhD. But we were training people, had a lot of fun doing that. Got to work with some really great people. Thought we had some cool ideas, and we ended up forming a little team, which was Renaissance Periodization, circa like 2011, something like that. So quite a while ago. And that was really the beginning of it. And we started helping write diet and training programs for people online, and never really thought it would be anything too crazy. In fact, we just thought we'd be coaches. But lo and behold, it ended up becoming something through some ebooks that we came out with in 2014, diet templates in 2015. And then a few years later, the RP Diet Coach app came out in basically called 2019. And so we've been doing that ever since. And now we have a second app, the RP Hypertrophy app as well.
Awesome. Keanu, were you going to say something?
I was going to ask, so it seems like you guys have been doing the online stuff for a while before online even became very popular. Can you talk about like what doing things online was like in around like 2014 compared to now?
Yeah, it was a lot different. There weren't near as many people that were doing it. When we first started, it was really just Mike and I. We would send people Excel files for like diet and training, definitely nothing fancy. And then we communicated people largely just via email, and we promoted and talked about it on Facebook to start. This is when everyone used Facebook, right? Now kind of not as many people use it, but it was great because you got a lot of reach back then. People would share their own before and afters. And of course, like everyone in the friend circle would see it. People start asking questions. What happened? How'd you get in such good shape? And we really prided ourselves on two things. Obviously, our delivery was not that like pretty. It was just Excel files. But make sure we get people results. Make sure we treat people well. And so back then, there weren't nearly as many coaches. There wasn't as much competition, and it did really well. We ended up hiring some other coaches that Mike was going to school with because we couldn't keep up just the two of us after a while. So we hired some people that he knew that he was going to school with, because he was going to school to get his PhD in exercise science, sports science. And so, who better than people studying this for a living that also were competitive athletes themselves to, help coach other people. So yeah, that was like, call it 2013 through, 2016, 17, something like that. Just really a lot. It's kind of grown and adapted since then, but that's really what it was. And then I want to say maybe in 2014-ish or so, we started getting on Instagram a little bit. And that, again, this is before everything has changed to how it is now. But yeah, you could post stuff, and a lot of times we would just repost other people's stuff. Like I ran our Instagram up until, I don't know, a few years ago, and that's really all we did, because people would voluntarily share their foods, their pictures, their results, their videos, and all that, and it just looked great for us. We're like, hey, these are just some badass results, some badass clients. Like, right, this is easy, free content for us to repurpose.
So now, how would you say that the marketing has changed?
Yeah, probably a lot of different ways. I don't run any of our Instagram stuff anymore. We've got people way more qualified than myself doing that. They're way more creative. Um, it's a lot more, I don't know, like kind of just, it really depends. You have to really stay on top of it, because like sort of trends and things change all the time. I would say it's a lot harder nowadays just because there's so many people. Like there's just so much more content out there, whether some of it's AI or just more people posting all the time. Because again, everyone's an online coach nowadays, more or less. So yeah, it's a little bit harder to stand out. You just got to kind of be able to adapt and roll with some of that a little bit more. Like I will say, what worked well for us, like way back in the day, was posting before and afters. And people see those and like, this is crazy. Like, let me know more. I mean, now I think all the algorithms are basically just, they don't care. No one cares about before and afters. Like they don't get any traction anymore on social media. So you really just kind of have to change and adapt. And, now it's maybe a little bit more, I don't want to say gimmicky, but like a little bit more trendy and meme type stuff, gifts, all that. Just people that just, I don't know, draws attention and all that. So you kind of have to be able to do, I know, especially on YouTube, maybe a little bit more kind of clickbaity stuff. Because again, and like, I don't like that stuff, but at certain times, like you have to, in order to just be able to stay in the game, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree. Can you talk about how it was transitioning from Excel sheets to an app? Like what sparked that idea, and what was your experience like with that?
Yeah, there was kind of one more little mini phase in there. So we went from Excel templates to PDFs. Not that it's that much different, but like they looked maybe slightly better. But kind of the whole time we knew that we wanted to do apps, but just like building apps yourselves. And this is kind of what I tell people if they ever ask, like, oh, cool. Hey, like I'm a coach online. I've got a decent following. Like, should I do my own app? And I'm like, no, stop. Don't do your own app. Go get something like kind of out of the box. There's lots of different, coaching softwares and platforms now. And like, it'll get you 80 to 90% of what you want. It won't have everything that you want exactly, but it's like, it's not worth the headache and hassle, nor the cost, because chances are if you're like a solopreneur type, you don't want anything to do with building out your own app. Like go use something out of the box, get you most of the way there, and you don't have to deal with all the headaches of doing it yourself. Because then it's on them, the platform itself, to keep up with all the changes and updates and all that stuff in the App Store. All you have to do is just use it, and you don't have any of the headaches. But yeah, so we kind of used, so when you're selling Excel templates and or PDFs, like you have pretty high margins and it doesn't really cost a whole lot to produce them. So we kind of just were using that to fund the app building in the background until eventually, we knew that we wanted to get an app up.
Okay. Speaking on transformations, like to you and from what you've experienced doing, the different challenges and transformation, things like that, what to you, for the most part, drives success in the transformation? Is it more so the accountability, the nutrition, the training, or knowing that it's a collective? Where do you put things on your level of hierarchy?
I think so let me give the caveat that a lot of times, like the demographic that we go after is already a bit self-motivated. I think, we're not kind of going after, general population folks that like kind of need that, kick in the butt, so to speak, to get in the gym and get going. Like a lot of times the people that come to us are sort of self-selecting. Like they're already kind of interested in fitness and know that they just want a little bit more out of it. That all being said, of course, there's accountability to having an app or something like that sort of holds you accountable, and or a coach. So that's a big part of it. But I would say the community aspect in general, being able to be around a lot of like-minded people. So we've got, a big Facebook group, obviously our social media is pretty big. You can go on and just interact with people. And I think that's a big source of it. That would probably be the number one thing that I would rank. Maybe beyond after that, I guess whether it's diet or training sort of depends on the person. I would probably say diet is the next most important, and then sort of training after that. Because we used to have a lot of people that have great transformations that just did CrossFit or something like that. Great, you can get tons of great results just from doing that. And now it's maybe a little bit more like hypertrophy style focused, which I think is best for body comp changes. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that. So that's why I would rank training is the least important out of those three things.
Okay. What are the most common training mistakes that you see people making and how to avoid them? And if we were to pick an area, let's say first we'll go with hypertrophy, and then from what you know with bodybuilding and things like that, let's use glute training because that's a hot topic these days.
Biggest mistakes, probably using too much weight. So, I was young once. I'm not that old, I guess, but I like to sling around weight. And, sometimes you're in the gym, there's a lot of other people in there. The ego takes over a little bit. Like you just want to sling around some weight and kind of look impressive. I get it. That's cool. It's a lot of fun doing that. I think sometimes people take that a little bit too far. Like sometimes I'll be in the gym. A lot of times I train at home, by the way.
Okay.
But I do go to a gym, a couple times a week. And, sometimes I'll see some stuff that I'm just like, okay, oh boy. Like, I'm not sure what muscle group they're trying to work out. Like they're kind of doing a clean / hammer curl / I don't know what it is. So I think that's a big mistake is trying to use too much weight because you just want to kind of inflate your ego. You just want to throw around some weight and all that. Which kind of, this all sort of ties together, but the ego thing, because then I think like not using proper technique would be another big one. Because, and again, like if you're doing an exercise and someone says, hey, what muscle group are you working? And you don't have a really good answer for that, like you're probably not doing things right. Like if you're trying to train your biceps, or I'm sorry, use glutes. If you're trying to use your glutes, let's say, I don't know, you're doing lunges, you don't really feel it in your glutes. You probably need to make some little tweaks or changes. And again, maybe part of that is because you are using too much weight. And so you kind of just have to do whatever you can to move the weight. Okay, well, maybe you change up some things, go a little bit lighter, focus a little bit more on like, hey, I'm really trying to feel it in my glutes. So cool. I'm not going to I'm going to try as best as I can to use a little bit better technique where I'm not pushing off as much with my, back foot or something like that. Or I'm going to take a little bit longer steps. Just a couple little examples. So I think those kind of all tie in together. Just like too much weight, ego lifting, bad form / technique. I think that it's kind of all interrelated.
Okay. You mentioned that you currently train primarily at home. Is there specific reasoning for that or?
Convenience.
Okay.
Yeah. Convenience. And so like when I was competing, to in bodybuilding, I definitely made a conscious effort to go to a gym a couple times a week just to sort of get out. Because, if you're really in the thick of a hard diet, you train by yourself in your basement, like it can be a little hard at times. Sometimes you need to get out. You need that a little bit of people around you, good training partner, something like that. Especially if you're training legs or something a little bit harder. Like I find, you can push yourself fairly hard if you're just training by yourself, but there's just something about being around in a gym, around good training partners, also training hard, / just for me, just being around other people in general. Like I might just, give you a little more motivation, a little extra boost sometimes when you need it, especially in a diet.
You've been in the industry for a while, and I know we were talking about training mistakes. Is there anything on the coaching end that you noticed that you maybe have done not wrong, but not in the best way earlier on, and you change that now?
So, and again, I kind of have to think back because I haven't coached too many people in a while, but I think that sometimes I would just assume that people knew how to do technique because when I talked before about like the people that come to RP are sort of already self-selected. They're not like total beginners. And so sometimes I think we would take for granted, like, oh, like people know proper form, proper technique. Maybe we would send some video techniques or, some videos demonstrating the proper technique. Like now you can use your RP Hypertrophy app and you can sort of just watch a video to know exactly how to do stuff. But even then, sometimes you do that and sometimes people do things a little bit different. So I think that was a big one. I would just assume that people knew the proper form and technique. And then, people would say something like, hey, I'm not getting sore. You're like, wow, like, man, you did a lot of sets. Like, I don't know how you didn't get sore. And then you're like, hey, why don't you send a video? So probably, not getting video technique early enough to see how people are doing things. Because usually, like, if you watch a video, you can kind of quickly identify, you can be like, oh, okay, now I see why you're not getting sore. Like if we use glutes as an example. You're doing lunges, you're not getting sore. Like, I don't know what's going on. Lunges typically make people real sore. And so, unless you're doing them all the time, but again, like there's a lot to unpack there. But you start seeing people and they have really wonky form. You're like, oh, okay. Here, tweak these couple little things. Cool. And chances are they'll start getting sore, or sort of what you would expect they would start doing more of. So that would probably be a big one.
Okay. And would you utilize that same concept as far as like if we're looking at tips on periodization for strategies of breaking through a plateau? For a lot of people, does it come down to primarily, the weight that they're lifting, the rest, how they're lifting those movements?
Yeah. I think it depends on the type of person that you're training too. Because if you're training someone that maybe wants like a bit more just like general fitness, general results, periodization school, obviously it's literally what the P in Renaissance periodization stands for, or RP strength. But a lot of times, if you're training a more, a less serious clientele or group, you probably don't need to worry a ton about periodization because chances are like they're going to take some breaks, they're going to go on vacation, or like the holidays are coming up, so they train less often and whatnot. So like usually just getting them in and training pretty hard is going to get them, it's like the 80-20 thing. Just getting them in there, pushing it, training pretty hard, close to failure, good amount of volume. Like you're going to cover a lot of bases there. I think when you start working with people that are a little bit more serious, then you can start applying some of that periodization, like especially if you have competitors. Like, okay, cool. Like the way that you train sort of in a contest prep is going to look a little bit different than you might, sort of right after you compete. Like you should probably expect that things will change a little bit like that. So yeah, I think it just sort of depends on the type of person. And as you get a little bit more serious, you can sort of increase the number of like tools that you use at your disposal. Like if you're just training someone, it's like, hey, I want to lose 10 pounds. Like you probably don't need a ton of periodization in there. Like just get them to train hard and, actually follow the diet. If they do that, they'll get most of the results there.
I was going to ask about, and kind of led into it, training different types of athletes. What can you say, like that you learned from training like Navy SEALs to people doing like CrossFit? What can you say is like the main commonality, which I would assume is probably like motivation, and then what's the main difference?
The main commonality. So I think what was really cool, especially with working with a lot of CrossFitters, like at that really, really high level, is so bodybuilding, hypertrophy, even powerlifting. Like you go in, you train for like an hour and a half. That's pretty good. You're probably not training for too much longer than that. And I started to realize like these CrossFit folks would train for like 3 or 4 or sometimes 5 hours a day. I was like, holy cow, just the amount of work that they would do is incredible. So I think like that to me was one of the first things that I noticed is just how much work these people put in. And I think that can apply to even people like, Navy SEALs and things like that, especially if you're going through really hardcore training. Like you're just going to be training a lot. So your volume is just sky high. So you kind of have to just keep that in mind when you're trying to program stuff or, trying to account for nutrition or like how do you recover from that? Like, gee whiz, when it comes to recovery, if you're already in the gym for 4 hours a day, let's say, you're not adding in stuff for recovery. You're like basically, hey, when you're not in the gym, do nothing because you're already doing so much. One of the other big things that I noticed, and I sort of started asking a few of the people this, because the people have this misconception, like if you're one of the best in the world, you're kind of just always dialed in and you're just like robotic with how you do things. And so I was like, was that true? And I'd be like, hey, Rich Froning, what do you do? Obviously, there's got to be some days where you're just not feeling it. Like you're human. Everyone must have that. And what basically all the top people said was very, very similar. They're like, yeah, no, totally. We always have days that you don't feel like it. Sometimes you're just really beat up or whatever. You just go into the gym and you kind of like just start moving. You just start doing something. Maybe you're like, hey, you know what? I might not be able to make it through my 3 or 4 hour workout, but I'm just going to go in and do like a little cardio just to get warmed up or like, a little active recovery, something like that. And then what they would say is typically like once they started going, once they started warming up, they'd start feeling a little bit better. Maybe the endorphins start flowing, whatever it is. And they're like, hey, you know what? No, I think I can do it today. But it just required just getting in there, just get moving, just doing something. It's like just taking those steps and getting in there tended to produce whatever it is that they needed to do. And I just thought that was really cool and really interesting because, again, a lot of times people think that like these top level people, they're just purely robotic about what they do and that they don't suffer from, the same things that everyone else does. And like, that's not really true. They just keep showing up and they just keep doing it. Like,
Mm.
obviously they've got good genetics if they're going to make it to the top, but sometimes it's not as noticeable in that regard as it is to like, what separates them. Well, one, it's just the sheer amount of work that they do and they just keep showing up and doing it. Well, you keep showing up and doing it for a decade in a row, like, gee whiz, like you're going to have some pretty good results.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, sorry, I was gonna say I think that's something that like everybody can take away, because a lot of times, especially people who are newer to the gym looking to make it a habit, they think that you always have to be motivated, when really nobody is ever motivated, even like the top athletes said, when it's about just building that momentum by doing something small.
Totally.
Once the momentum going, it's pretty hard to go against that.
Yep.
You brought something up that made me think about something I see online a lot. People worried about like the interference effect, saying like, oh, if you do too much cardio, it's going to kill your gains. But then you have these athletes who are training 4 hours and they're doing so many different styles of training. Can you talk about how interference effect isn't going to be a limiting factor for most people, because they're not like training hard enough to even hit that point?
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty spot on. I think there's kind of this whatever misconception that if you're trying to be a bodybuilder and you go out and like do any cardio whatsoever, like somehow you're going to lose all your gains. And yeah, that tends to not really be true. I also think this kind of plays into this bigger thing that like once you have some muscle, like once you grow some muscle, it's pretty hard to lose it.
Yes.
Like what it takes to grow muscle can be pretty intense. But then once you have it, like the amount of work that it takes to maintain that is usually quite a bit less than what people think. Like most people, I think, especially bodybuilders, if you're training, in the hypertrophy competitive sense, like you could probably dial down your volume and not really lose any gains for a while. And like sometimes you'll see that because the really top people, like after they compete at a big show like Mr. Olympia, like they'll take a month or two off because like their body just needs it. And they come back and like a couple weeks later or a month later, like they're right back to where they were. So it's pretty cool. I think that just gives people a lot of flexibility. Like, let's say, I don't know, you're traveling or you have a bunch of whatever work coming up, or holidays right now, right? We're recording this during, month of December. You can scale back your training if you need to a little bit. And you're not going to lose all your gains. Just like if you wanted to start doing some cardio, like a little bit more high intensity cardio, you want to run, I don't know, you want to do some cycling or whatever, you're probably not going to notice these huge impacts to like your, the amount of muscle that you have. Like if you're doing a lot of it, yeah, okay. If you're doing a lot of really high intensity cardio, or if you try going into the gym and training legs really hard, you might notice it a little bit. But again, it's not really this huge thing because you just look at all these like hybrid athletes. And they're all insanely jacked. Usually that just comes with like a little bit of trade-offs if you want to try to go at like the higher levels. Like I don't know if I would recommend someone that's competing on like the Mr. Olympia stage to go do a bunch of high intensity cardio, but like they're probably not doing it anyways because, well, like one, I don't know why would you? But once they're retired, yeah, you can probably start doing it just for general health. And again, they'll probably hold on to a lot of the muscle that they had. Again, there's a bunch of other variables in there too, right? With all the other substances, supplements, and all that. But yeah, I would say I would generally agree with you that like you can do a little bit more cardio than you think, and it's not going to inherently ruin your gains.
Okay, so if you had to like baseline structure a workout plan for somebody to ensure muscle growth, like you said, with that minimal dose of cardio effect, what would that look like for you just off the top?
Oh, so they're trying to maximize hypertrophy?
Yes.
So in an ideal world, if I had a client that was like, hey, you know what, I want to lose 10, 15 pounds, I don't want to lose any muscle, I'd go, all right, cool. So you're going to want to lift weights at least like 3 times a week. In an ideal perfect world, more like 4 or 5. Again, it depends on the person's schedule and how much other stuff they have going on in their life. Whether they have a really demanding job or if they have a bunch of kids. Like sometimes you just got to be flexible with that. I would say 3 times a week would be minimum for lifting. In an ideal world, I mean, I train 6 times a week, but because I prioritize fitness. Fitness is a huge part of my life, of course, but somewhere in that sweet spot, maybe 4 to 6 times a week, I think would be really good. 3 would be on the minimum side. 6, obviously, no more than 6, of course. And then I would say, hey, just aim to get like a certain number of steps each day for your cardio. Like you don't necessarily have to do running or something like that, but if you're sort of staying active enough and getting in a step count, whatever, magical number, a lot of people like to think is 10K. That's cool. That probably sounds great. If you're doing that every day and lifting like 4 to 5 times a week, and then you start to dial in your nutrition pretty well, you're going to lose a bunch of fat. You're not going to lose any muscle. Like that would be sort of my sweet spot for those 3 things.
Okay. And as far as talking about the nutrition side of it, like how would you build out that baseline nutrition plan for someone if their goal was, like we said, 10 to 15 pounds of fat loss?
Yep. So start with protein. So let's just make it up. Let's say they're 200 pounds. You're somewhere around 200 grams of protein a day, about a gram per pound of body weight. And then assuming they're going to the gym for about an hour to lift some weights and they're just like getting in their normal step count throughout the day, you're probably at like 1 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight for the carb intake. So that's, let's call it 250 to 300 per day, something like that. And then you would need to kind of know what their baseline calorie intake is, just like maintain their body weight. Then you just kind of fill in the rest from fats. Fats probably won't be super high, but I'm just purely making this up. I don't know, 70, something like that, 70, 80 to start with. And again, these are all just baselines, and then you have them track their body weights a few times a week. They report back to you, and if it's going down, cool, you probably don't have to make too many changes. If it's not going down, well, then you start looking at things and you start asking some questions if they're actually following the diet plan to start. Assuming they are, then you start making some tweaks from there.
And when you're looking at that from like the check-in perspective, are you manipulating that on a weekly or a bi-weekly time frame, knowing that you need to see some sort of adaptation before you just like, oh, let's just pull this next level?
That's a really good question. I think it's good to have the check-in several times a week, like 2-3 times a week is probably pretty good. If I was coaching someone, I probably wouldn't change anything the first week. I'd probably give it 2 weeks, especially on the female side, female clients. I think there's a lot more like water weight fluctuations. So sometimes you just kind of have to be like, all right, well, are you actually not losing weight, or is it just like there's a bunch of other variables in there? So I would say on average, it's probably good to look at like a 2-week time span. Sometimes that will depend on just the general timeline. Because like if you're coaching someone, I don't know, let's say a contest prep, again, I still probably wouldn't modify a whole lot of things the first week, but I might be a little bit more aggressive based on the goals and the timeline that someone else has to then start changing it potentially on a weekly basis. But probably looking at that like 2-week time frame. I think that's a pretty good general rule of thumb.
Okay. And then with that, did you have something, T?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say with that, knowing that people are going through the process and a lot of people like that glorified validation. Oh, I've done something for 27 days. I deserve this, this, or this, or certain things aren't happening fast enough, right? What advice would you give to someone struggling to see their progress despite being consistent from what they think, knowing that you have the data from your check-ins and so forth?
Yeah, it's definitely the art of coaching in there. I think there's a lot of kind of wiggle room on some of that. I think it's good when you start working with someone to kind of help like set expectations. Like, hey, cool, like we're going to do this for 3 months. You want to lose, let's call it 12 pounds. That's a pound per week. That's the goal, a pound per week. We don't necessarily need to go faster than that if that's the goal. And sometimes that goes back to goal setting, because if they choose something really, really aggressive, you might want to be like, here are the trade-offs. If you want to lose 20 pounds in 3 months, you're going to have to go a little bit more aggressive. So that requires a little bit more dedication, a little bit more, X, Y, and Z, because we're coming up on the holidays. If you want to lose 20 pounds over 3 months, it may include dieting through the holidays, which may mean like you can't go to all the holiday parties and just go crazy. So again, it's like you sort of set the expectations up front. And then based on that, it sort of goes back to how often do you make the adjustments. Well, if someone has more aggressive goals, you kind of have to be a little bit more aggressive with when you start adjusting things. Mm-hmm. someone has more moderate, reasonable goals, you don't have to be as crazy. You can do it every other week, assuming they're on track and all that. Like if someone falls behind schedule and assuming they're following the plan, all right, cool. Let's be a little bit more aggressive there. So it's one of these things where it kind of always depends on like the client, what their goals and timelines are. And if they want more aggressive and they're okay with it, then you can dial up the intensity a little bit. If not, generally I like a little bit more moderate approach, because the harder you diet, usually it just makes the end of diet a little bit harder. And that's sort of excluding, GLP-1s, which kind of change the game a little bit. But I don't know how relevant that is to some people.
Okay. Key, you got anything, or I got another one?
No, I was going to ask. I had recently saw a clip of you and Paul O'Neill doing a podcast, and you guys talked about optimal versus suboptimal and how everybody is trying to, I guess, structure their training around what's the most optimal. Can you talk about how things aren't always necessarily have to be optimal to get results?
Yeah. Yes. People love optimal. People love the idea of like doing everything the best that they can. And listen, the whole idea is cool. Like, great. You're serious about it. Cool. You should want to dial things in. To me, this is like my own little personal mantra, is just the idea of consistency is more important than perfection. Because I think a lot of people can't realistically expect anything near perfection. Like, real world happens. You've got kids, you've got a job, you've got, whatever. You get a flat tire one day on the way to work or on the way to the gym. Like, you have to be willing. You can't have such a rigid mindset where if you deviate from quote unquote the optimal or perfect plan, you just have to know in your head you have to be able to roll with things a little bit. And I think that people that can roll with things a little bit more, because if you can be 90% of the way there, but if you can maintain that over the long run, over 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, that's a lot better than trying to go for 100% and then you sort of fall off the wagon after a month. Because I think a lot of people, like, we're coming up on New Year's. We're going to see this so much here in the next month. People are like, it's time to start. Great. I haven't done anything in the last 6 months. Cool. I'm going to start running every day. And you're like, I dig it. I love the, intensity. I love the mindset. Like, people want to go get it. But you don't want to burn yourself out by jumping in. Again, it's like, if you're 6 years old and you've never swam before, you probably not jumping into the deep end, right? You're probably starting on the shallow end and like, hey, I'm going to learn how to float first. And it's kind of the same idea. And so you sometimes just have to go, you know what? Like, maybe we don't throw the whole kitchen sink at you in terms of what we need to do. We start with a couple little smaller things. Or it's like, hey, for example, oh, cool, you're used to drinking like normal soda. Cool. First thing we're going to do is you just cut that out. You sort of get used to that. So I think a lot of times the whole idea of optimal is pretty overrated for a lot of folks, because even the very best in the world, and I actually have a really good example of this, is I tried writing a diet for this high-level CrossFit female athlete at one time. And she trained like 3 times a day. And so I tried writing like the perfect nutrition plan for her. I had things timed down to like the exact minute. Because in my head, I'm like, this is my chance. Like, this is going to be the best. This is going to be the best diet I've ever written in my entire life. And she's never followed it. Because it was too intense. So for me, I just didn't realize it at the time. This is probably like 2017 or so. But then a couple of years later, Rich Froning, I was working with him, and he was like, hey, you know what? I want to try like some fasting stuff. And I said, hey, man, I'm like, I don't think this is optimal for you. He's like, I get it. He's like, yeah, I just want to tweak some things. It'll just be a little bit easier with my schedule and like what I got going on in the mornings. And he's like, hey, I don't love to eat in the morning and all that. And I was like, cool. So again, it goes back to like knowing the fundamental principles. I was like, cool. All right. Well, we're not going to, as long as we hit your total calories and macros, the timing we can be a little bit more flexible with. And so I was like, all right. So you're not going to have a breakfast before you go train. I don't love that. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily for people. But we just pushed things back a little bit. He had a couple of little larger meals. He still hit everything they needed for the day. And lo and behold, like, he was fine. So again, it's the idea of trade-offs of like, it didn't have to be optimal and perfect. Because I mentioned this earlier, but it's that idea of like, as a coach, you kind of picture things as optimal and perfect in your head. But then like, there's this art of coaching people. And that sort of requires being able to roll with things. If you expect people to be perfect, like, I just don't think that's realistic for 99.9% of people. I mean, but is it okay if I swear?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
fuck it. Like the idea of perfect, like, fuck that. Like no one can do it. At least not over the long term. Maybe like a hardcore bodybuilder or someone like a month before a competition is going to be so dialed in that they can be 100%. But like that's a little bit of an outlier there. So you just have to keep that in mind.
Do you notice that it's mainly how you were speaking on perfection? And I deal with this with a lot of my clients. It's like you're like, oh, I just wanted to be perfect. And it's like, you're the only one that wants that perfection so much. Your coach, the person that you're asking for this guidance, knows that like you're going to go through a road that's going to go like this. And you wanting that perfection over the consistency, like you said, is really what's beating your ass right now.
Yeah. So I love the idea that people that like want to be perfect. You're like, okay, cool. All right. So hear me out. Nutrition labels are inherently off a little bit regardless anyway. So like you can't hit perfect, even if you were following everything to a T. Like there's inherent, margin of error on all nutrition labels. Or like, guess what? When you're scooping out your protein powder or whatever it is, are you perfect? Like again, at some point you got to be like, you know what? I'm close enough. I'm good enough. I'm pretty damn close. As long as I'm pretty consistent with that, like that to me trumps everything in the long term or medium term even.
I think the lifters or just people in like whatever aspect of fitness have the best results when they have that more adaptable and flexible approach. And I think it's people who haven't gotten started yet who are seeking this perfection, and it stops them from even making any like visible progress because they're like, hey, I need to do what I saw on social media from somebody who's just spitting out like the most optimal recommendations from a textbook. So
sometimes it stops them from even getting started because they're like, oh, I can't do all this. And you're like, you don't have to do it all. Yeah. I
have a question about training splits because I know you train 6 days a week. So you probably have more time to isolate specific muscle groups. But I see this online a lot. People questioning what workout split they should do when they only can train like 3 or 4 times a week. So can you talk about the difference between doing a body part split versus more like movement patterns and when one should use both?
Yeah, so it's just my opinion, my take on it. So in general, if you have fewer times that you can train per week, you should be doing, let's say it's 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, probably, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, whatever it is. You're probably on like an upper lower split. So you're training, upper body Monday, lower body Wednesday, upper body again on Friday. Cool. The next week it's lower, upper, lower. You're kind of flip-flopping each time you go in and train. And you're probably hitting like compound basic movements. You're probably not doing a ton of isolation stuff because you want to get in. You probably have like an hour to train. You want to get in. You want to hit the big muscle groups because when you're doing pull downs, you're doing rows, you're doing presses, you're working your arms as well. You're getting the big muscle groups because there's sort of more bang for your buck. You're probably not, doing a lot of isolation stuff. Like if you only have an hour to train, and let's say you're trying to train all upper body, so like push and pull, you're probably not doing a lot of biceps and shoulder work. Like a little bit, cool, but when you're hitting rows and you're hitting pull downs, pull ups, and all that, you're hitting all those muscles anyway. So you start with those bigger compound moves in general, and then the more times you can train per week, you can start to get a little bit more specific. So, all right, if you're training 6 times a week, cool. Like maybe you are training more bicep isolation stuff because you have the time for it and you can, but you're not sort of prioritizing that over the bigger, more compound lifts when time is a limiting factor. That makes sense. So you can specialize more the more often you train. Is kind of how to look at it, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted somebody else to share that because it's a common not misconception online, but it's a common debate, and I think people focus on it.
So going with that, can you give what to you would be optimal if your goal is to grow your glutes, because that's what the craze is right now.
Yeah.
Are you doing quads and tibs one day, calves the next, or are we looking at it, 3 lower body days, a squat day, a hinge day, a total day? How are you designing that?
Super good question. So I think there's I'll throw in a tad bit more nuance. So I think like the smaller you are, so on average, females are typically smaller than men on average, right? This is just speaking in averages. they can probably crank up the frequency a little bit. So if you're a female and you're like, hey, I really want to get bigger glutes, you're probably hitting them 3, maybe 4 times a week, I would assume. You're probably not blasting a ton of volume every single time, right? If you're training 3, 4 times a week. But I think sort of what you said is a good approach, because you probably want one day that's like maybe a bit more like squat focused. Maybe another day is like a bit more of I don't know, lunge focus, something like that. Some type of lunge movement. It could be, Bulgarian split squats, Smith machine, reverse lunges, like whatever, right? And then maybe the other day is like a bit more, I don't know, isolation stuff. We were doing more, hip thrusts or, some little like kickbacky type things. I don't even know what those are called off the top of my head, but so you kind of arrange it like that so you can get a little bit of good variety in there. The bigger you are, so if let's say you're like a big over 200 pound plus bodybuilder, probably twice a week. You could probably have, and again, it really depends on the emphasis. So if you're going to emphasize something, you're probably starting the day with that muscle group. So maybe your first leg day of the week, you are starting with like, whatever glute movement you have. Now, again, maybe the second leg day of the week, like maybe you are starting with more of like a quad focus or a hamstring focus, but you're also doing the glutes. Maybe it's just a little bit later in the workout. Like that's probably how it is, because typically the bigger you are, the longer it's going to take to recover from training that muscle group. So it's probably like for me, 6 times a week, it's basically push-pull legs. So you're training legs twice a week, so you're probably hitting glutes 1 time a week. Maybe it's a little bit heavier, maybe it's a little bit harder, something like that. And then the other day, you're kind of like flip-flopping it is whatever you do. So if you have more of a focus on like a compound lift earlier in the week, you're maybe doing something a little bit different later in the week. Maybe you are still doing some of those same movements. Maybe it's lighter, maybe it's higher reps, but there's just a little bit of variety in there, probably something like that.
Yeah, I 1000% agree with that. I think the beauty of it all is there's so many different ways to program, but within those programs, what would you say is the top 3 things that have to be in there in terms of like different training variables? Because I feel like there's so many different ways you can grow any muscle. It's more so how you apply the programming.
So probably make sure you're getting enough volume in for that muscle group. It's probably the most important. Closely tied to that would be just like the intensity, because you can have all sorts of volume, but if you're 10 reps away from failure on every set, it's kind of like, I don't know why you're doing that. So you want to get sort of close to failure, so the intensity has to be high. And I guess with that, maybe this is one of those things where sometimes I make assumptions, but you just have to make sure the form and technique is pretty good too. And if you have those 3 things, gee whiz, you're pretty good to go.
Yeah, I 1000% agree. I see online, me and Dom are in this Facebook community, and a lot of times people are dropping routines, and it's so much volume, and it's kind of like what you were saying earlier. Like they're like, oh, I'm not seeing results, I'm not sore, and it's like, how are you doing those exercises?
There's no way you're doing all that.
What does it look like? So I think people have the knowledge in terms of the different training variables that need to be present, but the execution is something that most people overlook. And then that brings me to my next point of, I think now everybody is like in the gym and like taking pictures and stuff, but I think people should spend more time actually recording themselves and looking at the way they're executing exercises, and then you'll probably find the holes in what you think is the cause of your plateau, because likely it's not the program.
Yeah. So like I said, I normally train at home, or if I do go to the gym, like I try to time it where I go in the morning, like, 9 a.m. or so there's not a ton of people in the gym. Well, I think like 2 weeks ago, I had to go at like close to 6 p.m. And I hadn't done that in a while. And man, oh man, there's like so many tripods out. It seemed like every kid was like 22 and was wearing their young la, and they all had like the same haircut. And I just was like, whoa, this is intense. This is crazy. And they're all just kind of standing around chit chatting, which again, like I love that. Like, cool, I get it. It should be fun to go to the gym. You should want to have fun. You hanging out with some friends. Like, cool. That's how. Again, a lot of times, a lot of the friends that I still have. I mean, shit. This is where I met Mike at Michigan. We met in the gym. So I think you can make tons of great friends. You can be friends with forever. A lot of the guys that I hang out with here, it's like guys that I literally met in the gym. So I'm not trying to dog on that at all. But if you're sort of wondering why you're not getting results and you're in the gym for like 2 hours, but an hour of that is spent like, scrolling on your phone or like looking at your whatever pictures that you just took or the video and all that, like you can probably stand to train harder. Like that's probably fair to say that. And so again, like to your guys' point, when you see someone that's doing like 30 sets per muscle group, like every workout, and you're like, how can you do that much? And then you see a video of them and they're like doing push downs and they're just like kind of moving their arms. You're like, oh, okay. Yeah. You're not actually training. Like that's it. They're not really, they got the volume, so to speak, but the intensity is not there. Like something has to be changed or doing, or the form's probably not there too. Yeah. It's crazy.
A question that was asked was, can you explain, and kind of should know this answer, but can you explain the difference between what under eating is? Because some people feel like they're not eating enough, right? A calorie deficit, and then starvation as it pertains to a woman's ability to lose weight during a weight loss phase.
Yeah, man, really, really good question. So I used to think about this a lot because people are big. I feel like I'm under eating, and it took me a while. And I'm going to make it just these are just my general observations. When people said, "Hey, I'm under eating," okay, so the first thing would be like, "Are you losing weight?" They'd be like, "No, not losing weight." Okay, cool. So you're not under eating by definition. Typically, what they mean is they probably don't have like a set plan for when they eat meals. So like they don't think that they're eating as much as they are. Maybe they don't eat a lot during the day, but then when they get home, they're going ham. They're going crazy, and they're eating these huge meals at home, and or they're like snacking on little stuff throughout the day, which adds up the calories. You know how it is if you work in an office and you walk around and there's like M&Ms and M's and chips and snacks and all that stuff sitting out. You're probably going to grab a little handful here and there, and you don't even realize it. You're like, oh, you don't even realize you just ate like 200 calories in chips or whatever candy. So again, people are like, I'm under eating. Like, you're not though. If you're not losing weight, you just by definition you're not. So there's a little bit difference there. If you're in a calorie deficit, now again, this is trickier with females because of all the water weight stuff going on. So sometimes you have to look at things other than just the scale, like how clothes are fitting, strength in the gym, and all that stuff. If all the other variables are trending in the right direction, but the scale's not moving, okay, like they could just be on maintenance. They might not be in a calorie deficit. They could be in a slight deficit, but it's not as big as they think. So, like, are they having a free meal each week? Like, maybe that's sort of offsetting it over the course of the week. That could also be the case. But typically, if you're in a calorie deficit, weight is slowly trending in the direction of downwards. When people say they're under eating, what I found in my experience is they're under eating at some part of the day. They're making up those calories somewhere else, though. I can almost guarantee it. And then the starvation thing, I mean, that's a really interesting one because it's like you're not starving. Now, you could be a 120-pound female that has to eat 1,000 calories to lose weight. That could be the case, and that sucks. There's just no way around it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're starving. That just might be what it actually takes. So, like, maybe you got to focus more on lifting, right? So if you can get a little bit more muscle, maybe that means you burn a few more calories, like you're able to eat a little bit more. Maybe you need to, you take a look at their schedule, or they track their steps for a week or two, and they're averaging like 4,000, 5,000 steps a day, and you think, okay, why don't we work on getting that up? What are some ways you can increase that step count so you're burning a few more calories? Because sometimes you don't want to keep reducing their calories because you're like, yeah, it's not fun to eat 1,000 calories a day. It sucks. So what are some other ways, some other tricks that we might be able to do that? But I don't think in the modern Western world, we really have to worry too much about the whole starvation thing.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I like that.
I was just gonna say, I think that's what I was talking to Dom about before you hopped on. I'm like, in the Western world, people are not dying from hunger. Like we're not in starvation mode.
Nah.
So I think a lot of times just people aren't objective with what they're actually doing. Like
Totally.
they can't be real with themselves about what they're doing, and then that's why I think coaching is so important. But then again, you have to be ready to be objective and receive.
And are they even tracking things correctly? Like, who knows? Maybe they're not even tracking stuff at all. And they're like, well, like, I'm not eating that much. And you're like, what amount would you have to eat to lose weight? And I have no idea. Well, how much are you currently? I have no idea. And you're like, okay, cool. So we're just making statements.
That's why
When
not
you
a
ask
fan,
the track, you're the bad guy.
Yeah,
I'm not a fan of the
if
intuitive.
you're fun, then you probably got to eat less. Listen, eating less sucks. Yeah, there's no way around it. It sucks. So
I know we talked a lot about like training and nutrition, but I wanted to touch on pretty much like the mindset stuff. I know you wrote a book, Fit for Success. Can you talk about what inspired you to write that book, and then also what similarities have you noticed between success in fitness and success in business as an entrepreneur?
yeah, the motivation to write that was it was during the COVID year, and I was literally stuck at home for like months on end, and I was like, I need something to do. And so for me, it was kind of a little bit more of like a personal project, and it was literally gave me something to do. I like reading, and it sort of goes back to I was working with some high level people. I was reading a bunch of books, and I started to notice a bunch of similarities. It's like you said, does success in fitness is that exclusive just to fitness, or are successful people in any other endeavor? Do they share some of the similar mindsets? And I was like, ooh, that's cool. Because I started reading a bunch of books, and I'd be like, this person said this. That sounds very similar to like what a top level athlete said. Huh, that's really interesting. And then you hear it somewhere else. You're like, oh, these things all kind of go together. That's really interesting. And so, totally, just a couple examples. Successful people tend to have longer term time horizons in mindsets in general. So they have a little bit more like patience. They have a little bit more, they can delay gratification. It's not all about like, I need this right here, right now. They're like, no, I'm okay with trade offs. And, I know that if I'm going to invest and save money, yeah, it's not as much fun now, but I'm trying to do something for later on in my life. Same with fitness. I'm not going to eat the cupcake now, for example, because I'm in a temporary diet phase and I'm okay with that trade-off. So there's a lot of that, which to me that kind of just ties into discipline. Delayed gratification is pretty similar to discipline. Um, Again, successful people know that they're going to probably slip up and make some mistakes. It's not so much that they're afraid of failure. It's just like if they do fail, if they do make mistakes, it's just like, cool, all right, what did I learn from this? What can I change? Cool, I'm not going to repeat the same mistake. That's kind of another big one. And then typically successful people kind of have this like internal locus of control where they focus on things that they actually have some say in versus, oh, I don't know, what's a good example? You sit and scroll on social media all day. Well, you can't control what other people do. If you let that kind of impact how you perceive things, like that's probably not great in general. So yeah, internal locus of control, longer term time horizon, not being afraid of failure would be like three that jump off to me. It's just like, if you can do those things, you're probably going to be successful in just about anything that you do, not just fitness.
You got another book coming out anytime soon, or was that one and done?
I was kind of one and done. Again, it was sort of, I needed something to do during COVID, and it was
Yeah.
great because it gave me something to do. And I was like, I want to get this out before the end of the year because I was like, I think this helped me. I think it can help a lot of people during the COVID year. And so it came out, November of 2020. So wow, over 5 years ago. That's crazy. Wow. Time flies.
Well,
To sit down and write that book?
What's that?
Was it hard to sit down and write that book?
Not as hard as you might think because I had a bunch of notes kind of planned out. This would be
Damn,
he froze or you froze?
I'm not frozen.
was that me?
Yep, that was you.
Sure.
There you go.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'll kind of start over. It wasn't as hard to write it as you might think because I had a lot of notes and sort of examples that I had pulled. So I kind of already had like the outline in a bunch of notes that I had, and so then I was just kind of filling it in, and then there's an editor that kind of helped clean it up a little bit. That you ramble a bunch, and they kind of come in and help clean it up. So that was before ChatGPT. So now you could probably use ChatGPT to help clean up some of that rambling first, and then turn over an editor. But it wasn't quite as hard as you might think. But again, it requires some discipline. You're like, hey, I'm just going to sit down for this amount of time, and just try to write, and just stick with it. It's just like fitness, right? You just kind of stick with it for a while.
What are your thoughts on ChatGPT usage in the fitness industry?
I think it just depends on how people use it. Like, I think people, it's kind of how optimal do you want to be, right? We talked about optimal earlier. I think you could probably go to it and be like, hey, write me a program for 3 times a week lifting, and I'm sure it could give out something that would be decent. And again, for like a beginner or something like that, cool, great, that's probably fine. But then, like, do you have any accountability? Not really, right? Because it's just Chat GPT is going to kind of tell you whatever sounds good to you. Like, it has a little bit of that bias in it where it just kind of wants to be like your best friend a little bit. I think it's inherently bad, but you just kind of have to keep that in mind when it's just telling you certain things. So I think it's just like anything. It can be a tool. Like, do you want to over rely on it? Like, I don't over rely on it too much because, again, I think it can kind of just be your cheerleader, so to speak. So you just kind of keep that in mind. And there might be some ways to prompt around that, I suppose, but still, it's just like it can be used, but it's not as good as a person when it comes to the accountability aspect and making sure you're sticking to track and things like that.
I think you said something that I think most people overlook, because with ChatGPT, I've seen people, especially on like Twitter, Instagram, and like Threads comments, you'll see like a coach post I guess like their program or something like that, and people are like, "Oh, why would I pay that when I can just go to ChatGPT?" But in 2025, and for like the longest, there's no shortage of information.
Yeah.
So if that's always been the case, and ChatGPT is just making it easier to access that information, like, why are people still struggling? And I think it's because people don't have that accountability, and people kind of overlook how important it is to have somebody like be objective with you and hold you to what you say you want to do.
And also, I think it's a little bit easier to like lie or not feel as bad when you're talking to like AI versus another human. Like, if you have to go tell your coach, like, oh, sorry, coach, I slipped up and I messed up and I ate a bunch of crap over the weekend. And again, it just goes back to accountability. And like, usually humans have a little bit more empathy too. And then they kind of like, oh yeah, you know what? Hey, I've had that happen before. Here's how I worked around it. AI can't do that per se. I mean, it kind of can, but it's still, it's like when you're not talking to another human, it's a little bit different, I feel. So,
Dom, do you have something else?
Let me see. A protein question. You kind of already answered it, but just do more direct. I know people get confused on like the amount of protein that you should intake right now, because a lot of people feel like the RDA's number of 0.8 grams is like for everybody. How would you differentiate those numbers for like a gym pop person and an athlete? And I would say what I'm noticing is a lot of people are trying to do more, thinking that it's necessarily, okay, now that I work out, because I'm an active workout person, I'm now labeling myself an athlete and just bombarding myself with more protein.
yeah. Some of this comes down to the optimality thing that we talked about earlier. Because in my book, I would say, even if it's a general population folk, it's a good rule of thumb, because chances are they probably have a little bit higher body fat percentage. You can still just go, hey, around 1 gram per pound of body weight.
Mhm.
And if you get close to that, you're good. Because almost certainly general population folks are under eating protein to begin with. So even if they don't get all the way there, but they get closer, it's still good, because they're probably more in that 0.8 range anyways. So for me, it's like, I like simplicity. That's just how I operate. Like, I don't optimize my life to get like perfect results. But I've also been doing this for like 20 years, and here I am. I'm still doing it. So I would tell people 1 gram per pound of body weight, get close to that. Because if you get someone that's a little bit more serious, they're not going to have any problem doing that. A general population person that's eating 50 grams of protein a day now, it's going to be a little tough at first. There's easier ways to do that now with protein shakes, bars, everything's a little bit tastier now, pretty easy. But again, like, just get them moving in that direction. And then sometimes, you don't want to sit there and explain the sort of the optimality of like, well, technically you can be at 0.8 or something like that. Because 1 gram is 1 gram. It's super easy. The math is easy. Anyone can do that math. You're like, oh, okay, I weigh 150 pounds. Cool. I need to get about 150 grams of protein a day. Awesome. Love it. Easy.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it goes back to the optimal conversation. And what drives me crazy online is, like you say, a pound per body weight, and then you have people that are like, no, it's per pound of ideal body weight. And in reality, it doesn't matter because everybody is going to be like in a certain like protein range. So it's not like a set number. So I think for like the people listening, I think the big takeaway, like, just simplicity is key. Be consistent and keep chugging at it as time goes on.
Even if they went from 200 to 180, now they're rather than 200 grams of protein, now they're eating more like 180. Cool. It's like we talked about earlier with nutrition labels and things like that. Like they're all in the same ballpark. They're all kind of close enough to get pretty good results, anyways. So, and again, if you use 1 gram per pound of body, well, as you lose weight, technically you're going to be eating less anyway. So it's like it kind of all washes out in my head. It's like no big deal. Keep it simple.
What would you say are 3 things that you would like listeners to take away from this conversation today?
So don't try to have like the perfect plan, which ties into consistency is more important than perfection. If we want to consider those one and the same, that's totally fine. Lift weights at least 3 times a week, no matter what you're aiming for. It's going to be good no matter what. And then number 3, kind of that long-term time horizon thing that we talked about. If you can be a little bit more patient with the process and understand that's going to take a little bit longer, and understand that sometimes you'll have to delay gratification and it's not just in the here and the now, you're probably going to be better off. You can do those 3 things. You're well on your way. Yeah.
People are probably gonna say it sounds too easy. It sounds too simple to be true.
What is it? Simple, simple but not easy. Like it's not really hard to do. It's just in what you actually have to do. It's just that consistency part and being able to do that, over months and years. And if you can do that, well, like that's how you get these kind of crazy results and transformations. It's no like huge secret that these people are doing crazy things. So no. They just keep doing the little things over a really long time, and they usually get pretty good results.
Literally.
I can dig it. Anything else, Key?
No, I think we covered it all. I think people have a lot to take away, and like I said, it's just going to sound too good to be true.
Right. No, this was great. Left a lot of gems. Hopefully, people pick them up and actually use them. This guy, for those that don't, this guy knows what he's talking about. So this would be a great one to make sure you have your pen and pad and take notes. But once again, guys, we want to thank Mr. Nick Shaw from Renaissance Periodization. This is the No BS Fitness Prescription Podcast with a unhinged perspective. Thank you all. Nick, for those that want to look up to you, find you, where are you at? Are you mainly on YouTube, Instagram?
So me personally on Instagram at nick.shaw.rp, but I would say check out RP Strength on Instagram. It's a good one to follow. And then if you want to basically watch any type of YouTube content around fitness, go check out the Renaissance Periodization YouTube channel where Dr. Mike's on. He's funny and he's sort of educational, informative. So you'll get some laughs. It won't be dry, dull, and boring. I promise you that. So check that out. Really any fitness topic you want to learn about, it's going to be on there. Just search for that. So yeah, those 3 spots will be really good. Guys, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be here.
Thank you. And we're out.